All right, let's talk about how the Cold War is escalating in the final years of the 1940s and getting into the beginning of the 1950s. So the first thing that's really going to escalate the Cold War is that division of Germany into East and West, and then the further division of the entire European continent into East and West, which will kind of follow on from that. For Germany, it will have a lasting impact as it won't be reunited until 1991. Following that, we also will see the establishment of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's NATO, involving the United States, Canada, and then 10 other Western European nations, which you can actually see marked on the map as the gold countries here. And then in response to that, the Soviets will form the Warsaw Pact, which are all the states in red, and it's essentially a answering military alliance. The purpose of NATO, the avowed mission of NATO, was the mutual defense against any future Soviet attack. And the Warsaw Pact will do the exact same thing, but reversed. That will come into being in the mid-1950s, 1955. Probably the single largest thing that will really escalate the Cold War into, or away from rather, a war of ideology to an actual arms race. The arms race, which is the kind of defining feature of the Cold War, will be the Soviet acquisition of an atomic bomb in 1949. Soviet Union will test its first atomic bomb, ultimately ending the United States' monopoly on that technology and kick off that arms race, which is a defining feature of the Cold War after this point. 1949 is going to be a bad year all around for the United States, because it's also in 1949 that Mao Zedong will prevail in a long civil war that has been going on in China, establishing the People's Republic of China under a communist regime. The political repercussions in the United States were immediate. Republicans charged Truman with having lost China and being too soft on communism. The American response will immediately be to refuse to recognize the new Chinese government. We won't allow a representative to sit in China's seat in the United Nations, insisting well until the 70s, until Richard Nixon, that the ousted regime, which is now exiled in Taiwan, was still the legitimate government of China. Following the loss of China, the Soviet acquisition of the bomb, in the wake of all of these challenges and new confrontations in Europe and elsewhere, the National Security Council will issue a report. These reports are often given alphanumeric designations. This one is known as NSC 68. And what NSC 68 does is that it approves the call for a permanent military buildup that will enable the United States to pursue a global crusade against communism. This manifesto, released in 1950, describes the Cold War as an epic struggle between the idea of freedom and the idea of slavery under the grim oligarchy of the Kremlin. And that really will be a defining moment. 1949, 1950 will serve to solidify the themes that we would recognize as in the Cold War moving forward. And it's going to be a defining moment for the Cold War, particularly in the 1950s. It will start changing as decades go on. But that's going to be the kind of base definition in 1950 and into the future. Now, there are a few places where this so-called Cold War will turn hot, meaning that there are actual moments of conflict. And one of those happens in the 1950s, and that'll be the subject of our next lecture.